brothers and friends, and dear listeners, first of all, I want to thank God for life and health. I also thank Him for the plan of salvation in Jesus Christ, for the great sacrifice made for us, for our salvation, and at this time, we want to consider the history of the beginning and the establishment of the Reform movement. However, before we get into that part, I want to mention a few things regarding the Adventist Church in its early days. The Seventh-day Adventists, having a prophetic basis in Daniel 8:14, they originated in the year 1844. Later, that is in 1860, they came together as a church when they chose their name and committed themselves to keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. There is your commitment. I read from the book, The Great Adventist Movement, page 58. We, the undersigned, we came together as a church adopting the name Seventh-day Adventists, promising to keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus Christ. Since 1844 have passed, many years, that is 16 years, until they had their first local organization. 3 years later, in 1863, the Adventists organized themselves as the General Conference. At that time, it was the time of the Civil War, which started in 1861 until 1865. And in the following year, after the organization of the General Conference, on August 2nd, 1864, during the Civil War in the United States, the General Conference Committee sent a letter to the governor of Michigan, which we will mention. This letter is written in this book here called Seventh-day Adventists in Time of War. I mean the Seventh-day Adventists in Time of War. It was written by Elder Francis Boone McClellan Wilcox. He was one of the members of the General Conference Committee. I will read what is on page 58 of this book. The undersigned, who make up the Executive Committee of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, respectfully submit for your Excellency's consideration the following statement. The denomination of Christians, called Seventh-day Adventists, having the Bible as their rule of faith and practice, they are unanimous in their opinion that their teachings contrast with the spirit and practice of war. They are, therefore, for reasons of conscience, against bearing arms. If there is any part of the Bible that we, as a people, emphasize more than any other point of our belief, this is the law of the Ten Commandments, which we consider to be the supreme law, and we accept each precept of it literally and absolutely. The fourth commandment requires the cessation of any work on the seventh day of the week. The sixth prohibits taking life. In our opinion, none of these commandments can be observed in military service. Our uniform practice is closely tied to these principles. Therefore, our people do not feel free to enlist in military service. In none of our publications have we encouraged the practice of gun ownership. And in said case of mobilization, instead of violating our principles, we have preferred to pay a fee, provide some assistance, or pay $300 in currency. And while this provision had universal application, we did not think that any expression of our feelings was necessary. Furthermore, we represent that Seventh-day Adventists are strictly against slavery, loyal to the government and sympathizes with it, against rebellion. However, since we have not had a long existence as a distinct people, and our organization has recently been refined, our feelings are not widely known. The change in the law makes it necessary for us to take a more public stance on the matter. For this reason, we present before Your Excellency the feelings of Seventh-day Adventists as a corporation regarding gun ownership, trusting that without hesitation you will endorse our request that, as a people, let us be under the intention of the last action of Congress concerning to those who conscientiously oppose gun ownership and enjoy the benefits of said law. Signed, John Byington, who was the president. J. In Loughborough, NG, o Vatvis Amadon, members of the Executive Committee of the Seventh-day Adventists. Later, on May 17, 1865, the following statement was made at the third annual session of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventists. And this is recorded in the same book, Seventh-day Adventists in Time of War, page 24. I read, "We have decided to recognize the civil government as ordained by God so that order, justice, and peace may be maintained in the country, and so that the people of God can live a quiet and peaceful life in all godliness and honesty. In harmony with this fact, we recognize the justice of rendering tribute, tax, honor, and reverence to the civil power as prescribed in the New Testament. While we gladly give to Caesar the things that the Scriptures show belong to him, we are obliged to refrain from any participation in acts of war and bloodshed, as they are inconsistent with the duties enjoined upon us by our myth. Divine Master, we decided that this conference should request the Executive Committee of the General Conference to prepare an article for publication showing our viewpoint on the teaching of the Scriptures regarding the subject of war. You can find page 24 of the Seventh-day Adventist book, In Time of War. At the General Conference session in 1867, the following was also decided, and this can be found in the Review and Herald. May 20th, 1867, May of 1867, I read the carrying of weapons or participation in war is a violation of the teachings of our Savior. And the spirit and letter of God's law. However, it is our duty to show respect to civil governors in obedience to such laws that do not conflict with the Word of God. By adhering to this principle, we render tribute, taxes, reverence, not etc. Review and Herald, May 28, 1867, during the Civil War in the United States from 1861 to 1865. The Lord's servant, Ellen White, received instructions from the Lord regarding military service and war. She wrote, "What am I going to do?" Reading is recorded in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, pages 361 and 360 in the English edition. I read, "It was shown to me that the people of God, who are His special treasure, cannot enter into this complicated war, as this would be contrary to every principle of their faith. In the army, men cannot at the same time obey their faith and the orders of their superiors. This would be a continuous torture of conscience. The men of the world are governed by worldly principles. They cannot understand other principles. The politics of men and public opinion contain the laws of action, by which they are guided and induced to practice a form of righteousness. But the people of God cannot be governed by these reasons. The words and commandments written in the soul are spirit and life, and they have the power to lead a man to submission and compel him to obedience. The 10 Commandments of Jehovah are the foundation of all just and good laws. But if the demands of the governors conflict with the laws of God, the only question to be resolved is this: should we obey God or men? During the Civil War in the United States, there were some who decided to take part in the war. And I read from this book called Light Bearers to the Remnant. I mean bearers of light for the remnant. This is a book that was published for the Education Department of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventists by Elder R. Bitzendorf Schwartz, and on page 121, he says the following: during the very last tense months of the war, several Adventist soldiers who voluntarily enlisted lost their position as church members. One of these men was a member of the church headquarters in Battle Creek. The announcement of his exclusion was openly published in the Review. I have a photocopy of the Review and Herald here, where this brother's name is mentioned. And I will read since enlisting in military service is contrary to the principles of faith and practice of Seventh-day Adventists, as contained in the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, they cannot retain in their fellowship those who enlist. Enoch Price was, therefore, excluded from the membership roll of the Bell Creek Church by unanimous vote of the Church on March 4th, 1865. Review and Herald, March 7th, 1865. The Seventh-day Adventists published a book. They published several books. Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary. And Volume 10, which is this one here, is the Encyclopedia. And in this Volume 10 of the Bible Commentary, they say the following about the Reform movement under the title 27th Day Reform Movement, German. They say the following: even though the original issue was about visions and setting dates, the bone of contention over the years has been the position taken by the Church on the 27th day regarding the duty of its members in military service. This can be found on page 1183 of the 1976 edition. That's true, that the bone of contention has been and still is the issue of military service and war. However, it is not true that the origin of the Reform movement was about visions and setting dates. In the same volume on page 10, the Seventh-day Adventist Church published the following. I read, a man, Joe, Vic, was called up to the German army. He proved to be an extremist, saying that he was shown in a vision that grace for all men would end in the spring. Several other people also made predictions, setting dates. Those who indeed claimed to be prophets, they accused the leaders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church for not believing in their predictions and for refusing to publish them. This is written on the same page of the Adventist Bible Commentary. On page 1183, the only name mentioned here was Joe Vic. Joe is the abbreviation for Johann Wick. It was also said that there were other people who marked dates, but their names were not mentioned. The name of Johann Wick, who claimed to have visions, is used in an Adventist biblical commentary in the Encyclopedia as the founder of the Reform movement. To be completely honest, we must say that this is not true. Johann Wick was a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, not of the Reform movement. Let's quote the words of Elder Arturo Grosvenor Daniels, president of the General Conference, what he declared in Friedenau in 1920. H.G. Daniels says, these here are the documents that were given to us by Brother Conradi. They must demonstrate what this movement consists of. We can certainly leave out the documents that you consider unrelated to your movement, or perhaps the first document is originally from Wick. And Durschla responds, he did not belong to this movement. I have had the privilege of being part of this movement since the beginning. Recorded in the protocol, page 45. This publication, the protocol, is a complete report, word for word, from the meeting of 4 members of the Executive Committee of the General Conference, with the representatives of 2% who were excluded from the church. Everything that was said in those meetings that took place was stenographed, and the Adventist Church published the booklet in German under the title Protocol. They translated the pamphlet into English, but they did not publish it. It was filed away at the General Conference. The Reform Movement translated the protocol into Spanish. Here I have a copy in Spanish, into English, and into Portuguese. And the quotes I made, they are from the page of the edition in Portuguese. And all the quotes that I will mention later will be from the page of the edition in Portuguese. Going back to the name of John Wick, we must say no. Johann Wick never belonged to the Reform movement, neither before nor after the organization of the General Conference of the Reform movement in 1925. However, his name is used to discredit the Reform movement, even if Johann Wick were one of the pioneers. He wasn't, but even if he were, and he, along with others, would apostatize, it wouldn't be appropriate to accuse the Reform movement. Because of the apostasy of a few, our church is not based on the feelings of men, nor on dreams, nor on false visions, but it is based on the eternal truth from the Word of God. In the year 1912, the Seventh-day Adventist Church published a Sabbath school lesson about God's law. The servant of the Lord wrote about the attitude of some, because they were placing too much emphasis on obedience to the commandments. And she wrote the following. I quote from Review and Herald, March 11th, 1890. You will find those who will say, you're too excited about this subject. You're too worried. You should not seek the righteousness of Christ and make that the ultimate goal. You should preach the law. As a people, we have preached the law until we have become dry, like the Mount of Gilboa, which has neither dew nor rain. We must preach Christ in the law, and there will be sappy and nourishment in the preaching, which will be like food to the hungry flock of God. At this point where the Adventists were so zealous in preaching the law and teaching the law, to emphasize the law, God put the church to a test. In the year 1913, the servant of the Lord, Sister White, warned the church in one of her messages to the General Conference with the following words. This is recorded in the book Selected Messages, Volume 2, page 403. She wrote this in the year 1913. We must raise the banner on which are inscribed the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Obedience to the law of God is the great issue. Let's not lose sight of it. We need to strive to awaken the members of the church and those who do not profess anything to heed the claims of the law of heaven and obey it. We must indeed exalt this law and truly make it glorious, undoubtedly in every way, without a doubt in all aspects. The following year, on July 28th, 1914, the First World War began. The leaders of the Seventh-day Adventists in Europe took a position regarding the war which was contrary to the historical position of the Church. They asked that the youth of military age take an active part in the war. They published the following, what I am about to read, which is recorded in the encyclopedia. Commentary on the Bible from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Volume 10, page 1183. On the occasion of the German mobilization, in August 1914, on the 27th day of that month, they faced the need to make an immediate and crucial decision regarding your duty to God and to the country and your responsibilities when called to the armed forces. After consulting with the few leaders of the 27th day available, at that time, the President of the Union, East European, informed the German Minister of War in writing, dated August 4, 1914, that the enlisted Seventh-day Adventists would serve on Saturday in defense of their country. Most members acted appropriately when called upon, even though many of them requested and were assigned to non-combat roles such as in the medical corps or in Red Cross units and logistical support. Many declared themselves conscientious objectors and in some cases suffered severe treatment for having done so. Commentary from the 27th Day Church, Volume 10, page 1183, 1976 edition. Here, they say that the Adventists had to make an immediate decision about this issue of the war. No, they didn't have to make any decisions. Regarding the issue of the war, the denomination's decision had been firmly established from the beginning. That is, a position against participation. What is Sidney Simbi? From the biblical commentary, they say the following: we admit that the three Seventh-day Adventist leaders in Germany took a position regarding the duty of Seventh-day Adventists in military service, which was against the official historical position maintained by the denomination since the American Civil War from 1861 to 1865 let's note that they admit that the leaders in Germany took a position contrary to the official position historically maintained by the denomination. But they keep saying they took that position on their own responsibility in a time of emergency, sincerely believing that they were doing the best they could under the circumstances. But this has never been approved or endorsed by any other commission or council of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. In the same book, page 1183 of the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary, the encyclopedia says that the position taken by the three leaders, which was contrary to the official and historical position, has never been approved or endorsed by any other commission or council of the church. Let's quote some statements from officials of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists to see if this is true. I have here a copy of the letter of the elder Christian. This elder Christian was a member of the General Conference Committee. He wrote to another member of the General Conference, to Union M and Kern. And here in this letter, he says the following: the General Conference Committee considered this matter during the council in November 1915, declaring that would give various countries around the world the freedom to continue adopting those special laws for themselves on the issue of military service and gun ownership. We, the delegates of the Rhineland-Lessemer Association, are in complete agreement. I agree with the biblical viewpoint as upheld by our leaders. We consider this a civil matter, that the governments established by God have the right to require, as cited in 1 Peter 2 verses 13 and 14, and Romans 13 verses 4 and 5. When asking the leading brothers, the General Conference Commission declared at the Autumnal Council in November 1915 that it granted freedom to various countries around the world to adapt to those specific civil laws in the future, as it was in the past. The elder Arthur Daniels confirmed the same thing. And this is recorded in the protocol, pages 59 and 60. He says the following: as soon as the war broke out in Europe, we carefully studied this matter in North America. From 1914 to 1918, during the war, right at the beginning of the war, the General Conference sent Elder William Spicer to Europe to investigate the matter that was happening there. And he checked the events, and when they gathered, the commission met, and Elder Daniel says, as soon as the war broke out in Europe, we carefully studied this matter in North America. And what was the result? What did they decide? On page 61 of the protocol, he says the following: we adopted this resolution, stating that each one should act on the matter according to their conscience. On pages 62 and 63, I read the following. So, there were some brothers who had the spirit of love for their country and went to the front, and they fought. They arrived in England and France. They went to the trenches, and I don't know what they did there, but they served, and they returned when the armistice was established. What was our attitude towards our brothers? What about the different ways of proceeding? We say that we don't want to be a conscience for others. We defined our attitude by declaring ourselves as non-combatants. We did not see the need to go to war. We deplore war and are against it. We must, however, grant each citizen the privilege of adopting an attitude that aligns with their conscience regarding the government. None of these people were excluded from our church. None were treated as if they were not Christians. Our brothers maintained the spirit of freedom, the spirit of love, of tolerance, and of mercy. We felt we couldn't place ourselves between a person's conscience and the church. It should be noted that those who went to the front and fought, arrived in England and France, went to the trenches, and when they returned after the war, they continued to be faithful members. None of these people were excluded from the church. Once, who was excluded? Those who went to war, as we mentioned in the case of Enoch, race. But in 1914 to 1918, Hubua was excluded from the church. Were those who remained faithful to God's law? The church granted freedom of conscience so that each one act according to your conscience. Once, how does God view the freedom of conscience to transgress His law? Let's read some testimonies of the inspired pen. The first is I read from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 634. Patriarchs and Prophets, 634. God bid He not give freedom to men to turn away from His commandments. The Lord declared to Israel, you shall not each do as you please, everything that seems good in your eyes, but keep and listen to all these words that I command you. Deuteronomy 12:8 and 28. When deciding on any path to follow in our actions, we shouldn't ask if we can see that it will lead to bad results, but whether it is in accordance with God's will. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Proverbs 14:12, quoted from Patriarchs and Prophets 6:34. Another testimony says, the greatest discourse of Christ, pages 51 and 52. Would men be free to separate themselves from the Lord's claims and establish a standard of duty for themselves? And would there be a variation of norms to adapt to the different spirits? And the government would be taken out of God's hands. The will of man would become supreme, and the high and holy will of God, his design of love for his creatures, would be dishonored, disrespected. Whenever men choose their own ways, they bring themselves into conflict with God. They will have no place in the kingdom of heaven, for they are at war against the very principles of it. By disregarding God's will, they are placing themselves on the side of Satan, the enemy of God and man. The Greatest Discourse of Christ, pages 51 and 52. The Seventh-day Adventist Church during the war gave freedom of conscience, and not only did it grant freedom, but it also ordered the officials to take part in the war. In August 1914, the Secretary of the European Division distributed a circular letter that we are going to read. I have here a photocopy of the original circular letter from the Union guy, Dales, Division Secretary, European, of the 27th day. On August 2nd, 1914, he wrote, Hamburg, August 3, 1914, to our dear brothers and sisters, Psalm 23 by greetings. A difficult and terrible time in which Europe has fallen. We would like to ask the following of you as followers of Christ. We must, by the power of God, be true, obedient in these days, and subject to the services of our land. 1 Peter 2, 13, 14, and 17. We must fulfill our military duties joyfully while we are in service or being called to serve, so that the officers of the day see in us brave, courageous, and true soldiers who are willing to die for their homes, for our army, and our beloved, cherished homeland. Our destiny is in God's hands. If we lose our life while we are in battle, let's remember that our life is hidden with Christ in God. Colossians 3:8. Point 3. Those who stay at home must prove to their neighbors that they are of noble mind and full of the love of Christ, ready to help in every possible way, to relieve the suffering and the sick, the wounded, the poor, the widows, and the orphans. We must not lose our courage, but be patient in affliction, doing like Moses, whose hymn we hope to sing one day, trusting in him as seeing the invisible. Hebrews 11:27. Let's not forget to diligently search the scriptures. John 8:9. Let's attend our meetings regularly, and above all, when we come to the throne of grace, you should not forget to pray for our government and our army. 1 Timothy 2:4. We must always remember our mission as messengers of Christ, and according to our strengths, serve to save souls. We commend to all of you the grace of God. Stay with Christian greetings, your brother in the Lord, G. Dial, Secretary of the European Division. 2 days after this letter, that is on August 4th, 1914, The President of the German Union, F. Schubert, sent a statement to the Minister of War with the following words. I have here a photocopy of the original letter sent to the Minister of War, Charlottenburg, August 4th, 1914. Very worthy Mr. General and Minister of War, since many times our views regarding our duties to the government, as well as our overall position on military duties, especially since our refusal to serve, on Saturday, in times of peace, it is considered to be fanatical. Therefore, I take the liberty of informing Your Excellency, presenting the principles of the Seventh-day Adventists in Germany, especially now, in the current situation of the war. Even though based on the sacred scriptures, we seek to fulfill the principles of Christianity by keeping the day of rest, the Sabbath that God established at the beginning, making an effort to put aside all work on that day. Despite all of this, we recognize in this serious time of war our duty to support the defense of the homeland and, under these circumstances, to bear arms, also on the Sabbath. On this point we take our stand, seeking, based on the scriptures found in 1 Peter 2:13 to 17. And here he reads, or cites the verses from verse 13 to 17. We have given these resolutions to our members. We also ask them to organize prayer meetings, asking God to grant victory to the German forces. If some of the Adventist callers refuse to serve on the Sabbath or object to bearing arms, we would be very grateful, Your Excellency, if the commanding officer is aware of our principles or resolutions. Regarding this statement, allow me, Your Excellency, to inform you that in Friedensau-Marzburg, our sanatorium, our missionary school, also 250 armed tents with a doctor in charge, and a number of trained nurses who can assist 1,400 wounded soldiers. They are at your disposal. We pray to God to grant victory to this just cause. I have the honor, Your Excellency, to remain the Adesina A.F. Schubert, President of the German Union, the President from the European Division, Conradi, and the President of the East German Union of the Saxony Association. They declared the following in a letter to the Army Commander. This was on March 5th, 1915. I will read what is found in the letter sent to the Army Commander. Dresden, March 5th, 1915, to the Commander-in-Chief of the 7th Army Corps in Dresden, regarding number 856, number 3 from February 22, 1915, which prohibited holding Adventist meetings in Dresden. Allow the undersigned to provide the following explanation. For several years, the undersigned has clearly presented to the military officials both verbally and in writing, that military service on Saturday in times of peace has always remained a matter of individual conscience. But when the war broke out, the leaders of the Adventist organization in Germany advised all their members, with your consent, in all lands under circumstantial pressure. And the need for the homeland to fulfill their duties required of them as citizens according to the scriptures, and zealously do on Saturdays what other warriors do on Sundays. As proof, let this copy of the included document that was written on the day August 4th, 1914, serves the highly esteemed Minister of War of Prussia. This position, taken years ago, is supported by the attached signatures. Signed for the European Division, L.R., Conradi, President. By the headquarters of the East European Union in Berlin. Signed, I. Schubert. And by the headquarters of the Saxony Association. Signed, Peter Drinhaus, President. I want to open a parenthesis here. My father was born at the end of the 19th century. That is, in 1893, when he was 19 years old. In 1912, he accepted the Adventist faith in Hungary and was baptized in the Seventh-day Adventist Church on February 13th, 1913. He received the circular letter from the European Division, asking all young people of military age to enlist in military service. He had learned from the previous year's Bote Sabbath school lesson in 1912 that we must be obedient to God's commandments. Now, he was in a dilemma. Should he do military service or not? Should he participate in the war or not? He wanted to be loyal to the church. And so, being an Adventist, he decided to enter military service. Many times he would tell us that his job there was to carry food from the kitchen to the soldiers in the trench. He became physically ill, and the officers sent him to home in order to undergo treatment. While he was recovering, the elder of the church convinced him that an Adventist should not participate in the war. He accepted the elder's advice, and he never returned to the army. For this reason, he was expelled from the church. That happened to my father. Here is a photograph of my family. This is my father. Here I am, me. Here is my mother and my two brothers. In 1996, in a church where they met my grandmother, my aunt, and my mother. The elder of the church, named Kutashi, taught the members that an Adventist should not participate in the war. A minister named Murbach arrived at that church on a Saturday to celebrate the Holy Communion. The table was beautifully set and everything was ready. For the solemnity of the rite, it was the first time my mother would participate in the Last Supper after her baptism. Pastor Murbach asked the congregation, "Who is next to Brother Kutashi?" The brother stood up and said, "Not next to me, but next to the Lord." However, the minister insisted, "Who shares Brother Kutashi's opinion regarding duties to the government? Please stand up." Approximately about 20 people stood up. The minister then said, "You cannot take part in the Last Supper." So they left the room and went to the church courtyard at the back of the church. And the rest of the members who stayed inside continued with the ceremony. Elder Kutashi invited those who were with him to his house to hold the service there. On that same date, they were excluded from the church. Among them was my grandmother, my aunt, and my mother. One of my mother's friends lived until the year 2002. Her name was Rosa Cones Lambro. Here is the photograph of her with me. I visited her in 95 in Romania, and I took a picture with her. She was very clear-minded at the age of 94. She told me how she and my mother were close friends, and both were excluded from the church along with the others. More, in that same Kende, this experience took place in Hungary, not in Germany. So the problem wasn't just in Germany, but sinnen in sinnen countries in Europe. And in those 16 countries, 2% were excluded from the church. Those who opposed participating in the war, I'm going to read the list of countries. Of the 16 countries where Adventist believers were excluded from the church: Germany, Austria, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, Estonia, France, Great Britain, the Netherlands, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Russia, Sweden, Switzerland, and Yugoslavia. In 1950, a public press gave a testimony regarding the exclusion of faithful members. I read from a German newspaper, since the outbreak of the war, a division took place among the Adventists. Most wanted the doctrine to remain inactive during the war. The other side, however, demanded the sanctification of the Sabbath even during the war. This controversy led to the expulsion of the organization, the defenders of the principles of the old faith. This was published in Kölnische Zeitung, Cologne newspaper, on September 21st, 1915, in the afternoon edition. In the year 1918, when the war ended, the Seventh-day Adventists declared through the public press that 2% of the members were excluded during the war. I have a photocopy here from the German newspaper in which they say the following at the beginning of the war. Our church divided into two factions. 98% of our members came through the study of the Bible to the conviction that the conscience commands to defend the homeland with weapons. Also on Saturday, this opinion, supported by all the board members, was immediately communicated to the war ministry. 2%. They, however, did not agree with this decision, ultimately being excluded because of their behavior unworthy of a Christian. These unruly elements became preachers trying to spread their crazy ideas. However, with little success, they falsely call themselves preachers and Adventists when they are not. They are deceivers. Such elements, indeed, to dismiss the treatment they deserve, would truly do us a favor. Our board has so far used the surplus money for the war loan, and this in the firm hope that Germany will emerge victorious in this struggle. Horrible. This was published in a newspaper called Dresdener, Neuesten Nachrichten, which in Portuguese would be the latest news from Dresden. April 12, 1918, as stated. Here in the newspaper, German, another statement was also made by the church through the press, and this is in this other newspaper called Stuttgarter Neustadtblatt. And I read what is written in that second newspaper. At the beginning of the war, there were some members, just like there are in other places, who did not want to participate in the war service, either due to a lack of spirit of unity or due to fanaticism. They began to spread their scruples in the congregation, verbally and in writing, aiming to lead others to do the same. They were urged by the church. However, due to their obstinacy, they had to be expelled, as they became a threat to internal and external peace. Stuttgarter Neustadtblatt, I mean the most recent daily newspaper, September 26th, 1918. What about the faithful were expelled from the church, and this was known not only by the public press, but also by the Catholic Church. I have here a photocopy of a Catholic publication called Paulinus from March 8th, 1953, and he tells them the following. In 1914, 2% of the members were excluded from the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Germany because they declared that participation in the war, and that also on Saturday, cannot be reconciled with Adventist doctrine. The excluded believers saw themselves as the true keepers and Defenders of Adventism, Paulinos, March 8, 1953, Catholic publication. Also, the Wikipedia Encyclopedia makes a statement about this which I wish to read from the Wikipedia Encyclopedia. After World War I, a group known as the Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement was formed as a result of the actions of L. Conrad and certain leaders of the European Church during the war, who decided that it was acceptable for Adventists to take part in the war. Those who opposed this position of participation in the war were declared excluded by the leaders of the local church at that time. Note that the same encyclopedia knows that the Reform movement originated as a result of the actions of Conrad and other leaders with those who were excluded from the church, and those excluded from the church formed the core of which later became the 27th-day Reform movement. It's interesting that Elder Conrad, Louis Richard Conradi, long before World War I was already convinced that Adventists should bear arms when required by the government. In 1886, he wrote a letter from Russia to Elder Butler, a portion of which we are going to read. Here is a photocopy of the Review and Herald where the letter was published from Conrad, written to Butler. And in this marked paragraph here, he says the following: after a long struggle, Baptists are now tolerated, and their preachers have full freedom to preach. They had to admit the carrying of arms, and we should do the same if we are to be tolerated here. The leaders of the Adventist Church in Europe sought, if to justify the position taken by the leaders of the church in Europe, they published several articles to explain and justify that apostasy. A lay member in Berlin wrote a booklet titled "See Christian D.C. and the War," which translated means the Christian and the war. I have a photocopy of the first page of this publication, The Christian and the War. And in this leaflet, he says the following: but what is important is that he wrote this publication as a lay member, but this publication was endorsed by the leaders because 3 of them prepared the preface. On page 18 of this pamphlet, it says the following: we showed in everything that was said that the Bible teaches, first, participating in war is not violation of the 6th commandment. Second, participate in war actions on Saturday is not a violation of the 4th commandment. Whoever believes differently Show us a statement from the scriptures or from the testimonies. And if you can't show, be careful not to bring accusations and statements that you cannot prove. Note the contradiction of this pamphlet with the statement that was written on August 2nd, 1864 by the Commission of the General Conference of the Adventists. They said, in 1864, the fourth commandment requires the cessation of any work on the seventh day of the week. The sixth commandment prohibits taking life. In our opinion, none of these commandments can be observed in military service. To be completely frank, these two statements are contradictory. One is opposed to the other. In reality, there has been a radical change for the worse in the position of the Seventh-day Church. Those faithful brothers who were excluded, they had no intention of forming a new church or a new movement. They didn't have a worldwide organization, but they had the local organizations, such as groups and churches that developed during the 4 years of the war. And what name did they use? In different countries, they use different names. In Germany, for example, they used the name, for example, such as, this here is a document from the German Union Registry. They used the name Missionary Society of the Seventh-day Adventists, standing on the platform from 1844. The name, the Reform movement, wasn't used yet. In Hungary, they used the name the Seventh-day Adventists, standing on the platform from 1844. Here is that name in the Hungarian edition. In Transylvania, the Adventists of the Old Faith. In Romania and Bulgaria, the Adventists on the Basis of Faith from 1844. In Yugoslavia, the Remnant Adventists. In Czechoslovakia, the Seed of the Woman. In Scandinavia, the Adventists of the Original Faith. These brothers in those places formed a core that later became a reform movement, as we will see shortly. Efforts were made for a reconciliation with the church if it repented and returned to the original position regarding war. A special effort was made in 1920 when 4 officials from the General Conference visited Europe. And these were Arthur Grosvenor Daniels, who was the president, Christian, who wrote that letter I showed, F.M. Wilcox, the writer of this book here, and M. and Cairn. These 4 members of the General Conference Commission met, and there were 51 members of the Adventist Church present at that meeting. And from the 16 members, the meetings were held at the Friedensau Missionary School in Germany. After several dialogues, the 2%, representatives of the 2%, they presented 4 questions to the leaders, AD of the General Conference. And these 4 questions are recorded here in the minutes on pages 15 and 16. The first question was, what position does the General Conference take? In light of the resolution that the German leadership made since the year 1914 regarding the 4th and 6th commandments, the second point was that proof there is that we do not follow the biblical rule regarding our brothers. Point 3, what is the current position of the General Association from the North American brothers regarding the testimonies of Sister White? And point 4 is, what is our message from Revelation? Is it national or international? We want to focus on point deck 1. After several days of dialogue, Elder Daniels gave the verdict that is recorded in the minutes, pages 93 and 94. I read, we believe that the views you defend are completely wrong. We believe in the 4th commandment just as we do up to this point. However, we are not in a position to support your interpretation on this matter. What would you have said about Moses if he, a few days after being given the law at Sinai, you would have been tasked with killing the king of Bashan and all the men, women, and children? Would you have accused him of murder? Nevertheless, God gave him the order to violate the 6th commandment. Do you see that in the interpretation of the commandments, there are many things, Onan, and we must have the freedom to read and understand the commandments without being subject to the interpretation of any small organization. The representatives of the 2% were not satisfied with the response or the verdict of Elder Daniels. They got in touch with other countries in Europe, and they understood that they had the same experience. They had those here in Germany in the year 1921, which was the following year, after the meeting in Friedensau. There was an international conference, and here are the representatives of this conference. And on November 18th, 1921, they elected an international commission made up of the following brothers. I will read their names. And this is the committee that was elected. Another brother who is not present here, named Dmitry Nikolic. They were formed or elected as an international committee. Their name is KJ Stuyfout from the Netherlands. Or, well, Ekeroth from Sweden. Rosenberg from Estonia. J. Adam Sack from Germany. P. Rasmussen from Denmark. Richter from Germany. J. Rosenberg Guy from Estonia. C. Spanknubel from Switzerland. D. Nikolic from Bulgaria. Notice that Vic's name is not on this committee. He was not part of this committee. This international committee decided to send 2 representatives from the 2% to the United States, North America, to San Francisco, California. And these 2 were the brothers Otto Welp and Wilhelm Spanknobel, to talk with the delegates there who were going to meet. These 2 they went to the United States. And in the year 1922, these 2 brother representatives handed a written letter to Elder Arthur Daniels directly, and this letter was not answered. The letter was dated May 11, 1922. The brothers waited until May 18, 1922, and then they sent them a second letter. This second letter also went unanswered. 4 days later, they sent a third letter. Well, to summarize, on May 22nd, 1922, asking to the representatives from the churches all over the world who were gathered there to respond yes or no to their 2 previous letters. On May 24th, 2 days later, Elder Daniels gave a verbal response in his usual manner as expected, saying that they could not present this issue to the delegates. As soon as our representatives had no success at all, when they went from Europe to the United States with such an important mission, the delegates of the General Conference in San Francisco were very busy. It is strange and difficult to understand that they had no time to listen to the representatives of thousands of souls in Europe. Yes, they were very busy at their assembly. What was the key point of their meetings? We want to quote from a well-known secular newspaper about what was happening in their meetings. This newspaper is mentioned in this book written by Brother A. Balbach, and I'm going to read this. Reference published in the newspaper. They say the Adventists in heated debate change their leader. William A. Spicer, Secretary of the General Conference, appointed as president. After a struggle that shook the Seventh-day Adventist Conference to its very foundations and threatened a split among its workers, yesterday, a compromise was reached between the 2 main officials, resulting in the unanimous adoption of the nominating committee's report, naming William Spicer to the presidency, and the removal of the previous president, Arthur G. Daniels, from the position of Secretary General, a position that Spicer held for 20 years. The compromise, however, was not made until after much criticism and bitterness, and the bitter denunciation of the politics. It is dirty that President Daniels and some others who supported him for months in the campaign to achieve a change in presidents. This was written in the San Francisco Chronicle. The San Francisco Chronicle, May 23rd, 1922. They were very embarrassed about what had happened. And after the election of the officials, the delegates made a resolution that was published in the conference bulletin. And this resolution is also recorded in the book here. They say the following, that there is clear evidence that the sad influence of political methods carried out by a comparatively small number to undermine the influence and destroy the good reputation of honorable officials among us. Therefore, it is resolved that we commit ourselves, we put in the name of God a complete regret for all these unsacred things. So the two representatives were unsuccessful. They couldn't interview the delegates to present the case. They had to go back to Europe and reported to the Bo Internationally Commission the outcome of their visit. At the end of the same year, 1922, on the 27th, from December 2, 1922 to January 2, 1923, the European Division, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, held a council meeting in Gland, Switzerland, where, among other matters, they decided the following. And what I'm going to read is recorded in this book here. Seventh-day Adventist in Wartime, pages 346 and 347. We honor God's law as contained in the Ten Commandments, explained by Christ's teachings and exemplified in his life. That's why we observe the seventh day, Saturday, as a sacred time. We refrain from all secular work on this day, but we willingly engage in works of necessity and charity that serve to alleviate suffering and uplift humanity in times of peace and in times of war. We refuse to participate in acts of violence and bloodshed. We grant, however, each member of the church absolute freedom to serve their country at any time and in any place, according to the dictates of their personal conscience. This freedom of conscience to indeed transgress the law of God was once again reiterated in January 1923, when our brothers saw that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has not changed its attitude toward transgressing God's law, granting freedom of conscience to each member of the church to serve their country at any time and in any place. They decided to organize themselves as a denomination under the name Seventh-day Adventists Reform Movement. Let's note that it took 16 years for the name Seventh-day Adventists to be adopted. And until the General Conference was organized, they passed 3 more years, 19 years. Likewise, Those who were excluded waited, and on the day, July 15th, 1924, they had an international commission meeting and agreed to adopt the name General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. But on June 1st, 1924, it was decided that they could not work more efficiently without an organization of the General Conference. And on July 15th, they decided that the General Conference should be organized. By this time, the brothers in different countries were organized into groups, churches, associations, and they were also able to organize 4 unions: the German Union, the Danube Union, the Baltic Union, and the Scandinavian Union. These 4 unions, they jointly published the readings for the week of prayer for the year 1924 in the name of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. The magazine was published in December 1924. I have a photocopy here of the publication of the week of prayer in the Hungarian language. And it was officially published in the name of the General Conference, in the name of those 4 unions and authority. It's very important to note that even before the organization of the General Conference, the unions agreed on the name Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. That name used by the German Union. International Missionary Society was not accepted worldwide as the name of the Reform Movement. From July 14 to 20 of 1925, the first delegate session of the General Conference was celebrated. Of the Reform Movement, there were indeed 18 delegates present, representing approximately 4 billion members. I will read the Mambao names of these delegates and the countries they represented. Konstantin Ursanti from Hungary. Wilhelm T. Richter from Germany. Dimitri Nikolic from Romania. Wilhelm Ditsch Korbman from Estonia. Johann Tabon Hanselmann from Germany. Otto Welp from Germany. Peter Rasmussen from Denmark. Wilhelm Maas from the Netherlands. Joseph Adamsak from Germany. Albert Krake from Germany. Mihaly Stam from Romania. Karl Kotzel from Germany. Heinrich Spankneubel from Switzerland. Herme Othonda from the Baltic Union. Jürgens from the Baltic Union. Karl Eckeroth from Switzerland. Max Kohler from Germany. And C. Adamsak from Germany. Here I have a photograph of these delegates from the first session of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. And here is a photocopy of the minutes from that assembly. And here are the signatures of the delegates with a stamp that says, Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. In this assembly, the national name was officially adopted in 1920. And what is the national name of our church? Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. The principles of faith were also adopted on that same occasion. The first officers of the Reform Movement were elected. They are President Otto Welp, Secretary Wilhelm Maas, the Treasurer, also the same Wilhelm Maas, and the committee, the presidents of the European Unions. Johann Wick and other fanatical elements were not part of the Reform movement, neither before nor after 1925. In summary, this is the true story of the beginning and establishment of the Reform movement. A very important question. Do we truly have the right to be known as God's remnant church in this world? Indeed. What gives us that right? The answer is given by the spirit of prophecy. Let's read. In a Review and Herald, July 17th, 1900. I read, Christ has a church in every age. Obedience to God's commandments gives us the right to the privileges of that church. What gives us the right to be the church of God, the obedience to God's commandments? Another testimony says in manuscript releases, that is manuscript releases, volume 14, page 102. I read the following: when a church shows itself to be unfaithful to the word of the Lord, whatever your position is, whatever your sacred calling is, the Lord will no longer be able to work with them. Others are chosen to bear important responsibilities. Important responsibilities. Release manuscripts, volume 14, page 102. The spirit of prophecy tells us how God views a church that is unfaithful to teaching God's law. This is taken from the book Life and Teachings, page 207. I read, thus they acknowledge God and his law, the foundation of his government in heaven and in all his earthly domains. His authority must be kept distinct and clear before the world, and no law that opposes. The laws of Jehovah should be recognized. If, in defiance of divine provisions, the world is allowed to influence our decisions or actions, God's purpose will be frustrated. If the church wavers here, no matter how seductive the pretext presented for it may be, against it there will be recorded in the books of heaven a breach of the most sacred trust, betrayal to the kingdom of Christ. Brothers, friends, listeners, let us be faithful to the law of God at all times, in all places. As a result of the salvation offered by Jesus Christ, and so we have the right to belong to God's remnant church. For more details about the history and development of our church, Seventh-day Adventists and the Reform Movement request information about, well, that's right, to the brothers, leaders, especially from the headquarters of the General Conference. We also recommend that you read the book published by the late brother Alphonse Baumbach, The History of the Reform Movement. May God bless you all. It is my desire and my prayer. Amen.